Welcome, everyone, to Guiding Principles for AI in History Education. I'm Sarah Weichsel. I'm the Executive Director of the American Historical Association. So why are we here today? The development and use of generative AI tools, including large language models, are posing both opportunities and obstacles for educators who teach history and historical thinking. The AHA's Guiding Principles for AI in History Education, which were published in August, is a product of the 2 years of work. And it emphasizes a disciplinary approach to artificial intelligence that focuses on specific aspects of history education that might not be addressed in broader institutional policies. So for today's webinar, we've brought together members of the AHA's Ad Hoc Committee on Artificial Intelligence in History Education for a discussion of this rapidly changing landscape. The webinar today is part of AHA Learn, which is a series of online programs that provide a forum for compelling ideas and important conversations in history education. I'm joined today by Brendan Gillis, the AHA's Director of Teaching and Learning, as well as several members of the AHA's Ad Hoc Committee. And now I'm going to hand things over to Brendan, and I hope that you will find the webinar helpful and productive. Thank you for being here. Brendan?
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks to all of our presenters and all of you who are joining us today. My name is Brendan Gillis. I am the Director of Teaching and Learning at the AHA. Before joining the staff here, I was a recently promoted Associate Professor of History at Lamar University, a regional public in the Texas State University system. I also have had the pleasure and privilege of serving as the staff liaison to the AHA's Ad Hoc Committee on Artificial Intelligence in History Education. Our governing council established this committee in 2023 with a charge to provide some kind of guidance for history educators at all levels, from primary through postgraduate. To fulfill this expectation, as Sarah noted, the committee developed a set of 14 guiding principles, which were approved and published on August 5th. This document will serve as the starting point for our panel discussion this afternoon. But first, some context. We are all, after all, historians. Our group started meeting as the immediate shockwaves around the viral launch of ChatGPT in November 2022 began to give way to a clearer awareness of the opportunities and challenges that the ready availability of generative AI tools posed for our work in the classroom. We recognized from the start that it would be an exercise in futility to try to address every aspect of artificial intelligence as it relates to our discipline. There are simply too many. Technology companies are integrating AI functions and capabilities into a growing range of the tools and applications we use to search the internet, communicate, design lessons, grade assignments, and organize courses. And we are still in the process of comprehending the full economic, environmental, and ethical implications of the staggering investments in the infrastructure required to train and operate AI algorithms. So first off, to be clear, the AHA Council also established a separate committee to address AI in historical research and publications. So these issues broadly fall outside of our purview. That group is starting to meet, and you will hear from them at some point in the future. Our focus has always been much more narrowly on education and the needs of both students and educators. We started our work by trying to gauge what AHA members would find most helpful. We conducted a survey of history educators, more on that in just a minute, organized discussions and listening sessions at regional conferences and the AHA annual meeting, worked to understand the capabilities and limitations of AI tools, and focused our discussions on the specific implications of AI for our discipline. The committee identified 14 guiding principles that reinforce 5 overarching conclusions. Historical thinking, we insist, matters more than ever in the age of AI. It can equip students to thrive in a world awash in AI-generated content, enabling them to understand the capabilities and limitations of this technology. As educators, we can promote AI literacy, but a first step will be to adopt clear and transparent policies that address how many students already use these tools. Generative AI offers shortcuts to accelerate or refine many tasks, but it cannot diminish the value of historical expertise. Let me reiterate that point. AI can do some of the things that historians do. It can do some of the tasks that we ask our students to do, but it will not replace us, and it is not at all a substitute for expertise grounded in thick knowledge of a field of study. In producing this document, we tried our best to meet history educators where they are right now. The guiding principles includes a glossary of common AI terms, in part to help explain why the committee addressed the umbrella category of generative AI, as opposed to, say, large language models or chatbots. Many of you asked for practical tips and model language. No one-size-fits-all AI policy can meet the needs of every course, department, or institution. As such, the committee developed a sample chart outlining ways that many students may already use generative AI and offering recommendations about what could and perhaps should constitute acceptable use. We envision this as a starting point for conversations about policies at the course and department levels with both students and colleagues. This work is far from over. Many issues remain to be addressed, and the current committee has recommended that its charge be renewed so that new members can continue to address the rapidly changing landscape. Now, we are fortunate today to be joined by a quorum of committee members, who I will introduce very briefly. Jenny Baniewicz teaches history at Amos Alonzo Stagg High School in Illinois. She also serves on the AHA Council in the teaching division. Doron Atar is professor of history at Fordham University Lincoln Center. Theresa is professor of history, humanities, and languages at the University of Houston downtown. Clulow is professor of history at UT Austin. Sonia Hernández is the George T. and Gladys H. Abel Professor of Liberal Arts at Texas A&M. And Lee Vinsel is associate professor in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society at Virginia Tech. Unable to join us today were two members of the committee, Tamara Schreiner, associate professor of history and social studies at Grand Valley State University, and Kelly Schrum, both a professor in the higher education program and the newly minted assistant provost for graduate academic affairs at George Mason University. Now, I will moderate a discussion with our panelists. I have a couple of questions for each of them to address. But before we do that, I asked Theresa if she would share some of the findings of the survey that we ran of AHA members to help try and figure out what it was that this committee could do to help all of you. Theresa?
Yes, good afternoon. Last summer, last May and June, this committee distributed a survey to AHA members to ask about generative AI in history education. About 1% to 2% of the membership responded, so that was 148 members. Most of the people who responded were moving quite cautiously at the time, so this was about 15 months ago, quite cautiously at the time. About half, for example, banned AI use. Most had redesigned an assignment or assignments to resist AI and were very concerned, moderately to very concerned about academic integrity. A minority, around 13%, had integrated AI in some fashion. Usually this took the form of having students fact check AI's output, history output. So the prevailing response to AI in the classroom at the time, the survey showed, was that there was quite a guarded response. However, the survey respondents were less conservative when they were looking ahead to the future, so that when asked about how the AHA could support them, only 22% asked for more resistance ideas. About 18% asked for best practices and guidelines for managing AI, while 17% wanted more ideas about how to incorporate AI. So this aspect of the survey, that a sizable number of people were reaching for something beyond fighting AI use, in part shaped our approach. The other influential factor was that there was mounting evidence that students were increasingly turning to AI in one way or another. So many of us observed a big jump in AI's presence in our classes. This was confirmed by a couple of studies. And so we tried in the guidelines to really grapple with that reality.
Thank you. I'd like to open things up with a question for all of our panelists. In selecting members for this committee, we sought a diversity of opinions and perspectives grounded in the experience of working at institutions with very different expectations for faculty workload, and often very different students. The committee also brings together expertise in various dimensions of historical research, pedagogy, curriculum, technology, and digital humanities, among other qualifications. And so, starting with Sonia Hernández, I'd like to ask all of our panelists to go around and very quickly answer the question, how are you experiencing AI at your institution right now?
Thank you, Brendan. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm kind of glad I'm going first because I believe I'm the least experienced of this group in terms of assigning or creating AI based assignments. I'm at a large institution. We have about 72,000 students or so, and it can be a daunting task to think about how to either ban AI completely or integrate AI. So there is no easy path here. I am very glad that our university has various resources, really through the Center for Teaching Excellence. I'm about to join a group. I want to explore this further, and so I'm about to assign the first AI based task. I am teaching a small grad seminar. These are MA and PhD students. It's on the Southwest and its borders. And I'm starting, baby steps here. I'm starting really small. They all have been doing preliminary research for their historiographical papers on some aspect of the Southwest. And so they will be producing an abstract of about 200 words. So they have been working on this preliminary research. So they know something about the topic. And so that's why I asked for this assignment sort of mid-semester. And so they will ask any platform, any AI platform, and I'm guessing that they're going to go with the one that Texas A&M is providing for free, which is the Gemini, the Google Gemini, and the Microsoft Pilot. So I'm assuming because it's readily available for them. And so they will basically ask this platform a prompt, to produce an abstract on that specific research topic, and then they will compare and contrast. And I did not ask for a written assignment, but we will discuss, they will be identifying historical inaccuracies, gaps, errors in terms of just citations, publication dates, those kinds of things, biographical data on the authors. And so I will report to this group in a couple of weeks to see how that goes. Thank you.
Thanks. Sonia, just a heads up, we were having trouble hearing you. The microphone
so
wasn't
sorry.
picking you up very well. I'll hand it over to Doron to go next.
Hi, guys. Thank you for coming. So I teach at Fordham University, and the general reaction to AI among my colleagues is been defensive. The primary concern is how to prevent students from using AI. And there was a faculty committee formed to try to create AI resilient teaching methodology. I personally, I'm very positive about AI, but in my own classes, what I did do in terms of revision is, first of all, I eliminated the seminar research paper and replaced it with a subject research in which students are responsible for the subject they choose. They do all the research. However they do the research, they submit an abstract of sort, and then they have a kind of an oral exam that I will conduct at the end of the term, modeled after, some European universities. All in all, I moved to have tests in class with lockdown browsers, and the integration of AI into my teaching, I have not done yet. I think that we are still too early in the process to ascertain what will be the real impact of AI. And we can be easily fooled into thinking that we've got it, that we know what are the limits of AI. I've often heard colleagues say, well, AI can do this, but cannot do that, only to discover a few months later that AI can do that and can do a better job than the students.
Great. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah. So my name's Lee and I'm at Virginia Tech. I am on leave this fall, but my experience was last 2 semesters last year. I taught a class called Algorithms in Society, which is mostly taken by computer science majors. It's an upper level ethics and social dimensions class on computing. I allowed students to use AI if they wanted to. I handled that by for their papers, for writing papers. I handle that by first having lots of conversations with them throughout this semester about what the tools are and aren't good for. In the first semester, I had such bad experiences with students just turning in raw outputs that I was able to tell the second semester, like, if you use this thing just to write your paper, it's going to suck. And so, like, let's not go there. I moved in a very process-oriented approach to paper writing in the classes, based on the ideas of writing teacher John Warner that includes multiple steps like brainstorming and drafting and revising. I'll say the biggest issue that I did not deal with yet, but I will in the future, is that I realized at the end of the second semester that students were using AI summaries instead of reading the text for the course. And I actually am starting to think that reading might be the bigger problem than writing in a lot of cases. And so going forward, I'll be using reading quizzes in my classes, but I've been using them for years, like basically my entire teaching career, because I needed to incentivize students to read, both at Virginia Tech and at Stevens Institute of Technology, where I taught before. So this is some ways just going back to old, proven, good habits that I kind of stepped away from briefly. And we'll see how it goes from there. I think I'm keeping an open mind about what we need to do to respond appropriately.
Thanks. Theresa.
Okay. I'm at UH Downtown, which is a public university. The majority of our students are first generation students. We have a big transfer population. And so we have our introductory courses, for example, are capped at 40, and then the historical methods is capped at 25, but we do all our own grading. There are no teaching assistants. So we're always trying to kind of factor in whatever we're trying to redesign or rethink, just the amount of grading that will go into it. So we set up a teaching circle just recently, 6 faculty members, 6 history faculty members, to redesign our common assignment for our introductory courses. It has to be a take-home essay according to what is, the structure of it right now, so that we don't have we can't really change at this point. So it has to be a take-home paper. So we have a mix of perspectives on the committee, which I think is going to be a really good thing. We all want, though, to create something that is real, right? Something that is producing real research and real writing, something that's flexible so that students have some choices within the parameters, and then something that's adaptable so that we don't have to redo the whole thing next year. That might be asking too much, and then the last thing is just something, again, not too labor intensive. So we're a bit between, like I suspect many of us are, a bit between the rock and the hard place, just trying to figure our way out.
Thanks. Jenny?
Hi, I teach at a public high school outside the city of Chicago with about 2,600 kids. So my day can be pretty full. AI is everywhere, right? Kids are cheating using it. So that goes without saying. But I think an interesting point is I had a student, she's like, I didn't do well on the test. And well, how'd you do the study guide? Well, I put it on AI. I said, okay, that's not going to help you because that's not what we covered in class. But I think we have to turn the tables on it and say, how can you use AI as a tool? So I had suggested you do the study guide on your own, and then you ask AI and you compare. And then she kind of looked at me like, wow, that's a genius idea. So I think we just have to start thinking as AI as a tool, and that's hard for us to do. But I'm hoping that's going to be my perspective on it, but it's really hard from a high school. I can't necessarily accuse anybody of using AI because there's really no 100% method of catching someone actually writing with it. So yes, we've had to go back to being in the classroom writing or putting students on lockdown browsers, and kids figure out really quick how to get around those lockdown browsers. So yeah, it's a constant thing every day, which I'm sure everybody else knows.
Thanks. And last but not least, Adam?
Everyone, I just have one slide or two slides, so I won't bore you too much. But I teach at UT Austin, so a large public university. Last academic year, I was teaching these small seminars in this classroom, so I felt kind of insulated from AI. I was meeting every student. I was talking to them. I was talking about their assessment constantly. And I felt just that I wasn't too worried about AI. Over the summer, I got really concerned about my 80-person lecture class. Now, this is not the biggest class that I've taught. I've taught classes with 400 students or 500 students, but obviously there's all sorts of possibilities with an 80-person class that students can misuse AI. And I was really concerned about it. And I spent a lot of time over the summer thinking about how to approach this. And basically what I adopted is a hybrid experimental approach with a combination of AI-resistant traditional assessment and AI-engaged assessment. So around 65% of the class is traditional assessment. It's a midterm, it's a final, it's largely fenced off from AI, it's fairly traditional assessment. But for the other 25%, and this is an experiment for this semester, I developed this new assignment. So it's a funding pitch and a research proposal for an imaginary grant. And this allows students to lean into AI with a set of clearly defined tasks that form a logbook that they submit. So they go through a series of tasks, and then along with the actual assignment, they submit quite an expansive logbook that details their engagement with AI. Now, it's not required. Students can also opt for a zero AI option as well. And it's been interesting to me. We often see these surveys. This is a recent survey talking about how 92% of our students use AI. It's been very interesting for me with this assessment. About a third of the class opted for the zero AI assessment, which was about what I had in mind, about the figure that I had in mind, but it was still interesting. I was very pleased so far with the results. The zero AI submissions were creative. They were highly engaged. And the AI-supported assessment was also very interesting. It drew on a wide range of scholarship that I wouldn't normally expect to see in an undergraduate class. Extremely interesting. So far, this is an experiment. I think in the age of AI, we're constantly experimenting with things. So far, I'm quite pleased with the results of this experiment, but I will say that the grading is extremely time-consuming, and that's often part of the issue with developing these more complex assessments that are both AI-engaged and AI-resistant.
Great, thank you. Now, before we open up for Q&A with all of you out there watching, I asked each of the panelists if they'd be willing to highlight one of the points that are made in the guiding principles document that they find particularly meaningful or compelling. And so I'd like to start with Sonia. What are the red lines for AI in history classes?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? I think there was an issue with my mic. Okay, great. So I actually want to highlight the very first principle that we worked on as a group. any conversation that is about artificial intelligence and history, I think needs to begin with a reminder or a recommitment of what makes our discipline unique. What are the core principles of history? What is it that we do as historians, and how we teach that? Because, that was part of our task, right? How to deal with this rapidly changing technology in the area of teaching. And so that, we think of red lines, it's, historical inaccuracies and academic integrity. Those are two major starting points. And, we have to remember that we are the subject matter, the subject experts. And we remind our students every day that we need to be mindful of, academic integrity, proper citation, giving credit where credit is due, and critical analysis, because that is one of the, one of the foundations, right, of history. It's really sort of, thinking about AI as not a stand-in for what we do, but as a potential tool that can help enhance our teaching, and reminding our students at every level, and even reminding ourselves when we engage in this in our research and in our everyday activities as practicing historians.
Thanks. Doron, you volunteered to talk a little bit about our observation that since many disciplines and professions are changing, the historical discipline will change too. How do you see our discipline changing? You're muted.
Sorry. I'm very much on the hold the position that we need to accept AI, embrace AI, and use AI. I think that AI has the idea that we can resist it, which is the response that most of my colleagues express. I think is whether we like it or not, it's just not practical. I think that AI has great potential to revive the interest in history over the last few decades. History has been pushed into the kind of the sideline in terms of the choice of majors in many universities. I think that it's partly because history became one of those items on the menu that's supposed to teach some practical skills like writing or this all kinds of things that every class can do. And I think that AI has the potential to revive the profession by moving away from the focus on technical skills like how to do a footnote. I think it's great if AI can correct your footnotes. I think it's great if AI can, if you create a study guide that combines AI and what you've studied in class. I think AI will bring back the idea of knowledge versus the idea of skill. And I think that the fantasy that I hear all the time that somehow a machine will not be able to do as good a job as we are is really a fantasy that I think that we need to accept that together with AI, we also see the decline of the long form of history. People are not reading books. Historians are keep on writing it, but not only students, but other people are not reading. And AI should usher us into a new era in education because, as it is, American education is in a crisis point because of the cost. So I think I look at AI as a real is a real ray of hope for the future of historical education.
So we have a vision of AI as a ray of hope for history. And I think, Lee, you offered to talk a little bit about what you think, what we as a group think historians should know about the capabilities and limitations of generative AI.
Yeah, so I mean, just to have a kind of definition on the table, generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI, is a genre of software tools that are able to create new text, computer code, still images, videos, and other content based on structures in data the tools have been trained on, often involving very large data sets. And if you want to know more about how it works, I would just encourage you to look up a video like "How Does Generative AI Work" on YouTube. There are several great short ones that are highly informative. So I think we're in a moment of real, I come from the field of technology studies. We are in a moment of very high uncertainty, both about where the technology is and is going, and about what the industry is going to look like in the next several years, given that many, probably most, generative AI firms are currently highly unprofitable. So how this is all going to shape up in the next couple of years is a real question. But what is certain is that generative AI tools can be used to create pieces of writing and other outputs that undermine our traditional assessments in history education, including the essay, which has been an assignment that's been my bread and butter for my entire career, because they can just put up, their outputs often match the quality of many undergraduates' writing, and they're very hard to discern at first blush. The tools have lots of issues. I mean, the most famous one is the hallucination problem, where they just make things up in very confidently, in confident language, just complete false facts, right? So there's lots of technical issues, and there's real debate in the field of computer science whether those technical issues will ever be resolved. Some people like Gary Marcus think that they're baked right into the heart of how these things work. But going back to this thing about it can do all of our traditional assessment, or many of our traditional assessments, to put it in Silicon Valley speak, we as history educators have been disrupted by this tool. And that's why it's so important for us to have these conversations and learn from one another about how to respond in very practical ways to how our students are using these tools.
Thanks. So AI has shown itself capable of replicating many of the assessments that we give to our students. We ultimately, as a discipline, are committed to this idea that students should learn how to do research. And so, Theresa, you suggested you'd be willing to talk about redesigning a research project in the context of AI. What does student research look like now and maybe in the future?
Yeah, so I'm clinging on to the idea that we can still have a research paper. I'm not ready to let that go. So I do impose, I like to try to combine a certain amount of freedom for the students with a fair number of controls too. So I redesigned the research project in the context of AI by switching to a guided research project that uses mostly, almost totally, primary sources. And what we started out with were historical newspapers. And I gave them a topic that is an understudied topic, which is the history. This is going to sound perhaps not interesting, but it really is. History of Labor Day celebrations in Texas. Students had the capacity or had the choice about which time period to choose. It had to be sometime in the 1900s, 20th century. Were they going to have a civil rights theme or World War II theme? Which city did they want to focus on? Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, El Paso. So they could do a number of different things with it. What I explained is that, again, this is an understudied topic, so they have a chance to discover something in the history that professional historians do not know or may not understand. Because there's not much out there for AI to vacuum up that is specific to Labor Day celebrations in Texas, their paper might be able to unveil some kind of hidden history. And at first, I don't think they believed me, but that some of them, again, started to root around. And it kind of, gets, I think, to what we like about the historical method. We like to have puzzles that we're trying to answer. We go back to the sources. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a certain amount of messiness. And so all of that is happening. But at the same time, I have these controls in which during the research and drafting process, those phases, we do weekly closed book quizzes to show, so that they can show their progress every week. And then they submit the sources that they drew on for that quiz ahead of the quiz. They have to incorporate a quotation from each source. There's scaffolding involved, consulting with a librarian, peer review, draft. And then at the end, I require an oral presentation. I've also tried a slideshow presentation. I'm not sure which I like better, but the idea being that they either have very few notes or no notes, and they're holding forth on all the things that what did they try to do? You know, where did they butt heads with the archive, with the digital archives? What were they surprised by? What were their findings? What was their best evidence? All of those sorts of things. And then finally, I spot check the sources, because I have had papers that were fabricated probably by AI, where the sources did not match the materials that were cited. However, on the other hand, I mean, that said, there were quite a few coherent, really engaging original histories that have come out of this project. And one, just real quickly, was about El Paso in the 1920s and 30s, where the festivities for Labor Day included all kinds of car races, dance parties, large-scale barbecue picnics, and all of this fun drew tourists to El Paso and drew the city of Juarez and El Paso into cooperative ventures about how to celebrate Labor Day, you know, cross-culturally. And so kind of an exciting paper. There were other examples, but I'll stop so that others can go.
Great. That really delved into some specific and practical ideas, I think, for how to design assignments that are perhaps AI resistant. Jenny, you also talked a little bit about an opportunity for one of your students to have a learning experience around AI and what it can and can't do. So what do students need to know about AI? And also, we talk about AI literacy in the guiding principles. How would you define AI literacy?
I think I want my kids to treat AI as if it's any primary source. You have to look for the bias. You know, there's going to be the half-truths, the inaccuracies or hallucinations. I've done a bit of projects with it where I wanted them to create a visual of something that we read, and the visual was very violent based on the stereotypes of the topics. I think that kind of like shocked the kids. So I think it's important that we use our historical skills to point out the bias, and that they could still apply that same skill, whether it was looking at a document from the 1800s or whether it's looking at what is on their screen right there. I think that's really important, that they become smart, right, in how to kind of detect how it could almost be used as a piece of propaganda, and they need to be aware of that. And then I wanted to also highlight the fact that so many of you are teaching the future history teachers, you know, like myself, right? And it's so important that you don't forget that part, because who's ever sitting in front of you is going to have to use AI. It's going to be impossible for them not to probably get a job without them having some type of AI tools in their portfolio. But that doesn't mean that we have to forego the basic skills that we all have, which is the research skills, the source evaluation, and the critical reading. I think we've all pointed out that kids are using this to read, and that's not what we want to have happen. So we're all going to have to teach those future teachers, how do you do this? At the same time, we also have to be careful that we don't use AI to also replace our knowledge. I might use it to help me come up with a question for a Socratic seminar, but I don't have it plan out the whole Socratic seminar. I don't think it should replace us in the classroom. And some people are kind of on the fence about having to use it, you know, for a grading tool. I think there's a lot of growth that has to happen in that. So to be very wary of that. But I think our overall goal is that all the same skills that I've been teaching for 28 years could still apply to how we source AI.
Thanks. And I think if there's one takeaway, one clear takeaway from this document, it's our encouragement to create clear and transparent policies for our courses that really account for some of the many different ways in which students are actually using generative AI. And so Adam offered to talk a little bit about what a clear and transparent policy looks like.
Great, thank you. Once again, I'm in lecture mode, so that's why I have slides, but hopefully it's helpful here. So when we were developing the guiding principles, we were hearing a lot from students that they were unsure exactly on AI policies, if they could use AI, where they could use AI, when they could use AI. You can see the survey here, 3 out of 10 students is unsure if they're allowed to use AI, and probably the figure is significantly higher. So one of our key principles is educators must develop transparent and concrete policies for AI usage, and they must communicate this to students. And we developed this table, and now this is just a sample table. We know that it generated quite a bit of discussion, but we just want to make it clear that our suggestion is for educators to have such a table, not that this table is definitive in any way. And indeed, what we really want to make clear is our suggestion is that individual faculty and departments should develop their own tables that meet their goals and student needs. Now, since the documents come out, it's been a very interesting response. We've heard from different educators on how they're developing their own tables, often in collaboration with students. And I think that's really the way to do it. So here is one table from a history seminar at Fordham. This has been developed in conjunction with students. Now, the expectations for this class and this particular table look quite different from the sample table that we had suggested, and that's exactly how it should be. You have to tailor these tables in consultation, in collaboration with your students. And in this case, I think this is a wonderful example. The professor has used the table as a discussion point, so to talk through students, to talk with students about when AI can be used, and also as a contract between educators and students. And you can see all the students in the class are going to sign this, and they're going to agree on when AI can be used. So every class is going to look different. If I'm teaching a small seminar in Japanese history, which is my field, I might have a very restrictive table that looks very different from the sample that we put forward in the guiding principles document. I might agree, just to give one example, with my students that AI can be used to check their understanding after they've done the reading, but not before. So for this kind of small seminar, you're going to have a particular set of rules that you collaborate with your students, and you come to an agreed point about policies that work for this particular class. Or if I'm in my large lecture class, I talked about the 80-person lecture class, or if I'm in a 200-person lecture class or a 300-person lecture class, I might have a radically different table. So our point here is that educators must develop concrete and transparent policies for AI usage and communicate these to students, but every class is going to have a different table and different expectations. These might look something like the table that we put in the guiding principles, which was purely a sample just to get discussion started. It might look like this excellent example from Fordham. It might look like my small seminar, but we believe that it is valuable to have clear expectations and to communicate these to students. And if you talk to students who are often taking four classes or 5 classes, they're often very unclear when they can use AI, if they can use AI. And having a table like this, or at least having a transparent and open discussion with students, really helps them to navigate this constantly changing world, and also a situation in which each class is different, each department might be different, each college might be different. So these policies are going to look different, and the other part of it is the policies are going to evolve. So I have a policy for this semester. AI is constantly changing. My policy for next semester is going to be different. And I think that's the value of a table like this, that it provides a basis for discussion with students, but there's no definitive table. It's always a basis for discussion and collaboration, and it's going to be constantly changing as the technology evolves.
Great, thank you. So now I want to open up and start accepting questions from the audience using the Q&A tool in Zoom. We already have a couple, but we'd love to hear from more of you. If you have a question for the panel or for any one of the presenters, please just type it into the Q&A and we'll answer as many as we can. Our first question is about online courses, which are very different than teaching in person. So, would any of you be willing to address these issues in the context of teaching online? Sure, Doron.
So, I mean, it depends what kind of online class. If it's an online class that is entirely done on students' own time, I don't have a solution. I think that it will be really naive to expect students who are taking online classes who tend to be working full time not to use AI. If, however, you are taking a class online in which you can designate a certain assignment for a certain time, then again, lockdown browsers can solve this problem. And I want to say something about lockdown browsers. They've been used by law schools for a few years already. They universities don't adopt them as a policy because they cost money, and universities are struggling with money. And you get to get this license. But I think for online classes, if you want to if you want to have any test that can indicate any level of command of the material or any level of historical thinking, you got to move to a lockdown browser.
Great. Jenny?
I was going to chime in. I know that Doran said that he uses like almost um, an oral exam, right? I don't know what type of online classes you would have, but if it was the type that you could make arrangements with individual students to have a one-on-one with them, even if it's over Zoom, granted, it's not perfect, but at least in that conversation, whatever topic you were covering, you could have that open conversation. I'm a terrible online student because I like being in the classroom. So I feel like for students that haven't really had that connection with the teacher, that would be one way, maybe of trying to make it like a quiz or whatever, but at least you'd have a conversation about whatever topic you wanted to cover. Just an idea.
Great. Theresa?
Real quickly, I've aside from the testing stuff, I've kind of shifted away. This is going to sound a little sad, but away from discussion. We still have discussions, but they're more open-ended, and I don't weigh them very much because I just felt like I was getting a lot of bot talk in my discussions. So I minimized that, but it's still there for questions and just batting things around. But I've emphasized a lot different kinds of activities that are harder, not impossible for sure, for AI to do, but things that I think the students would be interested in. So we've done things like a thesis statement is usually something that people stumble around with. And so we've used American Panorama, some of the tools there to develop a thesis statement, just kind of quick activities. We've tested out AI around generating a bibliography. Does it generate sources that are real? Are the sources cited correctly, or not in terms of format, but just, the right year, the right page number, the right author, those kinds of things, to try to kind of get a sense of that. So that's some stuff that I've tried that I feel pretty good about with the online.
Yeah, I was going to say part of the joy of my job is I get to interact with a lot of educators at different sorts of institutions, and people that I know who have been addressing AI in online courses have found that many of the things that you described, Theresa, in your research project apply pretty well online as well. Since generative AI is kind of a stereotype engine. It produces what an algorithm thinks should come out of a prompt. That we end up, it helps to illustrate some of the ways in which we need to read sources critically to begin with. So there's a quick follow-up question that came up from the audience about that. One of our audience members notes, I've noticed a dramatic shift in my online students this fall, even in comparison with spring. the hostility towards Gen AI is much higher, and the number of students using AI has dropped off significantly. And just wondering if this is a trend that others of you have seen at your institutions. Doron, and then Adam.
I just want to say that students in the beginning of the term, make lots of vows of virtue, and I expect all of them will be like New Year resolution about diet. The end of the semester will come and they will all do that. There is the students they start saying all these things about AI and the environmental stuff and how much it's really not fair and not right. But push comes to shove, the semester is towards the end of the semester they have to have finals and write papers. They will use AI. And so I would not put any faith in those declarations that they're not using AI. Just like I would not put any faith in the declaration they're going to read books.
Adam?
Yeah, so I agree with Doron. Maybe I put a little bit more faith in students. I mean, I just had this experiment with my 80 students, and I gave them the AI option and the non-AI option. But both are quite complicated. For the AI option, there's a very long logbook, for example. But I was very struck by the vehemence of some students that they did not want to use AI. And I've looked at roughly a third of students. I've looked at them all. You can never be 100% sure. I don't have any magical AI detector. There's no such thing as a magical AI detector. But I honestly believe that third of students feels quite strongly that they don't want to use AI. A lot of them came up to me and said this, and they were very happy that there was this non-AI option. So end of semester may look totally different, and I have to agree with that point. But I'm now in week 5, first major assignment, and I wasn't surprised that a third of the students didn't want to use AI, but I was really struck by how strongly they felt about it. They were just, and the option was there, but they were absolutely determined. So I think that's a really interesting question. And I guess I might say that maybe I'm seeing the same thing with the caveat that we're only a third of the way through the semester at my institution. It could easily change, but right now I have been struck by a lot of students are very resistant because they see so much AI content online, and a lot of it can be, particularly AI videos, for example, can be quite low quality. And so I at least have detected more resistance than maybe I saw last semester, for example.
But I think we need to encourage students to use AI because it's there, and the better students, the students who are not using AI will produce inferior projects.
So as you can see, not all of our committee members see eye to eye. That's part of the point. Sonia, do you want to chime in?
But just quickly, because this may be, I don't have hard data on this, but this may be, where, content, the content that you are teaching, because in my intro to Latino studies, I just did, the first day of class, I asked them to have a discussion on AI, and the majority were against the use of AI. And that may have to do with, AI still has a long way to go, and particularly when dealing with ethnic minorities and histories that have been marginalized for a long time. And so it wasn't hostility. I wouldn't describe it in that way, but they were hesitant, and maybe content matters.
So we had a really great question about our advice to talk about the limitations and capabilities of AI with students. How do you actually do that? And this is coming from a secondary school teacher. Like, what does it mean? How do you go about engaging students in all of the various implications of AI?
This is the beauty of being a history teacher, right? I teach U.S. history, I teach AP, and we were looking at the Paul Revere image of the Boston Massacre, and I said, it's propaganda, right? And we talked about how it's propaganda. I said, what else could be propaganda? I mean, I talked about social media, talked about AI. So I think it's going to have to be an ongoing conversation, because at least for teenagers, the light bulb's going to go on at different times, right? Another thing is like I said, I did an assignment last year, and it was kind of like that perfect moment of I gave students different speeches of Native Americans, and I said, let's see what happens when we put this into Canva. Canva is a software service a lot of us have, but they have a free image kind of thing, which I think that was another question of how do we find, kind of equity here, and trying to find some of these things are more expensive than others. But when they put in the quotes to try to generate what this would have looked like, every image was violent. And most of the Native Americans portrayed looked like they were Aztecs. And none of the speeches were that. And I think it was that aha moment that they had, or like, this is what you've been talking about. So until they have that moment themselves, I don't know if they're going to believe us. But if you could create an activity that shows the flaws, I think that would be really helpful, and just keep talking about it all year.
Yeah, I don't know when it's going to come out, but Trevor Getz has been doing some really interesting research on how to help students uh, begin to engage with AI in secondary classrooms, and it's very much in line with what Jenny was saying, allowing students to begin to critique AI themselves provides a great baseline for then providing all of the other context to help understand why we have concerns about AI.
There was a really interesting, Brendan, there's a really interesting aspect of that question, which is about students using, AI as a kind of substitute for learning, and it having, potential negative developments when it comes to cognitive development and such. And I think, that's something, again, we're in a very new and uncertain moment. So we don't know a lot, but we have seen reports that when doctors use these tools, for example, their skills slide over even a couple months of use. So yeah, I think this is just like, it's like anything. I think that you need to talk to students about the risks of a technology, and, and emphasize to them that this is why developing basic and fundamental skills is really important, and not to use it as a substitute, but to use it as, a tool that can aid us in various ways.
Great. We have one question and very, very little time to address it. But I'll pose it to the group and just see if anyone has some quick input. Do any of you have recommendations for dealing with AI equity? Noting that some students might have access to better tools than other students, and that seems likely to increase over time.
I was going to say high schools are probably in a different situation because the school would usually buy whatever product. But I think that conversation could go into that chart that we showed you, is that should be part of the conversation with your class. You have 800 or 80 students to 100 students, and not all of them will have full access. Maybe that needs to be part of the conversation of, would it be fair if you had the ability to buy the best AI and someone could only use the free option? Maybe that's part of the discussion, at least on a college level. But high school will obviously most likely be based on what the high school can afford, and of course that will not be equitable throughout this country.
Okay, Adam?
Yeah, I think it's an issue. I just have a very short answer. I think it's an issue. AI tools are somewhat inexpensive now because they're trying to capture market share, but there are certain AI tools that are much more expensive, deep research tools, and they could be up to $200 a month or possibly even more than that. So that's definitely a concern, and I think it's one of the things that would have to feed into this policy document. So yes, I don't have a recommendation as such, but it's definitely a concern that I have.
Yeah, and this is one of the many issues that have come up in our conversations that were really beyond the scope of what we were able to resolve at this stage. And I think, we're going to be continuing to think and talk about AI and its implications for history education for a long time. That concludes Guiding Principles for AI in History Education. We hope it was helpful, provocative, interesting, productive. If you're not a member of the AHA, we hope you'll consider joining to support programs like this. And a quick reminder that a recording of today's event will be emailed to you when it's available. Please share questions or feedback to ahaonline@historians.org. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks to the committee members for great presentations and sharing great insights today.